cannot survive without it. The West has done whatever was needed to secure it. The invasion of entire countries, the subjugation of entire peoples, great wars that killed or wounded millions on all sides. A hellish legacy we live with every hour. One company has been at the center of so much blood and all for oil. That company has had many names throughout the Middle East. It worked through a single secret pact, history's richest, most fabulous, and deadliest monopoly. That company is now known as British Petroleum, and the powerful secret pact it created is the Redline Agreement. Deception, fraud, war, the origin of the jihad against the West. It all comes together in British Petroleum and the Redline Agreement. Deception, fraud, war, and all for oil.
Thank you.
Okay. Very interesting, and I look forward to, and I hope everybody else does look forward to hearing your talk. And I'm sure appreciate the fact that you're here. We're anxious to hear what you have to say.
Thank you very much, everyone. I guess you can all hear? Good. There are so many interesting people in the room, and I'm so grateful that you've all come. Some from Montgomery County in Maryland, some from Philadelphia, some from Pakistan, some from Israel, some from Lebanon. Thank you very much for all coming. There are too many to give names, but we have a very eminent crowd here. We're here to discuss an issue that we deal with every day, which is petropolitics, and how we got into the Middle East, and how we became addicted to oil. And indeed, what we're facing. We're never going to be able to move forward in the future if we can't comprehend the history that we've come forward from. Now, we actually never needed to be on oil as an energy source. Most of you know that there's about 80 million barrels a day, maybe 88 million barrels a day of oil used in this country, and about 67% of that is used for transportation in the United States, and about 90 to 99% of that is used is based on automotive liquids, on fuels. But in point of fact, oil is older than civilization. You say modern civilization is oil. In fact, they were using oil 65,000 years ago in the caves of Blumbus in South Africa as a sealant for medicinal purposes. The first use of oil as a major illuminant came in the mid-1800s when kerosene was invented and people started to illuminate with it. In 1835, the electric car was invented. And throughout the remainder of the 1800s, all the taxis and buses and vehicles in the United States that were automotive were electric, until we switched to oil. Now, how did the West get into oil? How did we get into the Middle East? How did we get into Iraq? What is all this based on? There were never originally nations in the Middle East. There were tribal regions, but nations as we know them did not exist until they were created by one country acting in concert with the League of Nations. I'm sure you, may I say, one company in concert with the League of Nations. And I think you know the name of that company. I use that name from the cover of my book. It's British Petroleum, and I'm going to tell you how it happened. Originally, at the turn of the 20th century, all the ships in the British fleet were coal-bearing ships. And the German fleet had already moved and we're talking about 1903, and the German fleet had already moved into oil because oil was being developed in the Middle East and elsewhere. Now, when did oil actually come to the Middle East? Oil came to the Middle East primarily. Oil was discovered commercially in 1859 in Titusville, okay, in Pennsylvania. And the Allegheny Mountains were actually the Middle East of the world. They exported most of the oil. And the first oil exploration in the Middle East was actually begun late in the 1800s. And there was a company which had obtained an exploration license from the original Shah of Iran. And in 1908, they struck oil, and that was the first oil that was discovered commercially, which means they were able to drill down for it industrially. They didn't carry it out on donkeys, but they actually transported it commercially, distribution, and that company took on the name Anglo-Persian Oil Company. Now, this oil was in the Middle East, and the Middle East at that time was generally controlled by the Turks, the Ottoman Empire. And there was the term, the sick man of Europe. Many of you have heard of the term, the sick man of Europe. This was applied to the Ottoman Empire because the Ottoman Empire was so weakened from foreign wars, from internal debauchery, from corruption, not unlike some countries we know today, that it was expected throughout Europe that the Middle East would fall apart, that the Ottoman Empire would fall apart, and when it did fall apart, what would happen to the petroliferous colonies and territories controlled by the Ottoman Empire? Now, oil had not really been developed in the Middle East, but they knew it was there. The Ottoman Empire at that time was controlled by Abdul Hamid, also known as Abdul the Damned. And Abdul the Damned was the Sultan, and he owned everything. And when there was an urge and a movement within his caliphate to bring up democratic reforms and allow people to own their own land, he said, okay, citizens can now register their own land. It doesn't have to all be owned by the government, it can be owned by citizens. But then he said, I'm also a citizen, So I will register